Welcome back to what we call Amazing Stories. Today we bring you a story based on real events that happened, connecting strategies that were successful in their time and still are today.
What?
Do Adolf Hitler and George W. Bush have in common? It's not their ideology and it's not the era. It's a strategy, the use of fear as a tool for control. In 1933, the burning of the German parliament allowed Hitler to consolidate his power, eliminate his opponents, and restrict freedoms. In 2001, the September 11th attacks gave Bush the justification to start wars in the Middle East and pass laws that expanded the government's power. Coincidence? Or a tactic repeated throughout history? Stay tuned for this incredible story of conspiracy. Or is the truth clearer than ever? Berlin, February 27, 1933. The night sky turns red. The Reichstag building, the heart of the German parliament, is burning fiercely. The fire not only destroys walls and documents, it opens the door to a dictatorship. That fire was not just an accident or an isolated attack. It was a masterful, sinister, and premeditated political move. Adolf Hitler had just taken office as chancellor, but his power was still limited by democratic institutions. He needed an enemy, and if there wasn't one, he had to invent one. A reason to demand extraordinary powers, an excuse to justify the unjustifiable. Adolf Hitler had just taken office as chancellor, but his power was still limited by democratic institutions. So, what do we do about it? He thought. A reason to demand extraordinary powers, an excuse to justify the unjustifiable. Then, the unthinkable happened. Hours after the fire, the police arrested Marinus van der Lubbe, a young Dutch communist with mental disabilities. The press portrayed him as the perpetrator of the crime, and the Nazis used him as living proof of an alleged communist conspiracy to overthrow the German government. The reaction was immediate. The next day, Hitler convinced President Hindenburg to sign the Reichstag fire decree, suspending civil rights such as freedom of speech, press, assembly, and the right to a fair trial. With that decree, the state could raid homes, intercept communications, detain people without charges, and eliminate all political opposition. The German Communist Party was banned, and its leaders were imprisoned. The Social Democratic Party was silenced, and with the opposition dismantled, Hitler managed to pass the Enabling Act, which gave him absolute power to govern without parliament. Why? Did the fire happen? Because Hitler needed to create fear. And with that fear, justify concentrating all power in his own hands. So, one of his men did it. For him, the fire was the key that allowed him to turn a fragile democracy into an absolute dictatorship. The Reichstag burned, and with it, the last flames of the Republic were extinguished. What was born that night was not just a fire, but a regime. It was the Third Reich. Sources describe September 11th as the beginning of what is now a hegemonic agenda that paves the way for a constant global war, presented as a pretext for war. The official narrative of September 11th claims that 19 hijackers led by Osama bin Laden took control of 4 commercial jets with box cutters, evaded the air defense system, and hit 75% of their targets. It is stated that Towers 1, 2, and 7 of the World Trade Center collapsed in a pancake fashion due to structural failure caused by fire. It is also mentioned that the plane that hit the Pentagon vaporized on impact, as did the one that crashed in Shanksville. The 9/11 Commission concluded that there were no warnings for this terrorist act and that multiple government failures hindered an adequate defense. However, the sources present a very different perspective, suggesting that 9/11 was a false flag operation, orchestrated in some way by the state. It is mentioned that, while the official 9/11 narrative claims there were no warnings, numerous warnings were actually received by government agencies, including the FAA, in the months leading up to it. NORAD training exercises were conducted, using hijacked planes targeting the World Trade Center in the 2 years prior to the attacks. On the morning of September 11th, a number of overlapping and conflicting war games were taking place, which included the appearance of false blips on radar and hijacking scenarios, supposedly making it harder for the NORAD air defense system to respond. Despite having a 100% success rate on 67 occasions in 2000, NORAD failed 4 times on September 11th. As for the alleged hijackers, sources claim that several of them are still alive and that at least 5 were linked to U.S. military institutions. The passport of one of the hijackers from Flight 11 was supposedly found among the rubble of the World Trade Center, where there wasn't a single recognizable piece of the plane, yet they found the passport. Regarding Osama bin Laden, it is noted that he worked with American and Pakistani intelligence agents in the 1980s. In January 2001, the Bush administration allegedly ordered the FBI to stop investigations related to the bin Laden family. It is also mentioned that bin Laden allegedly received money transfers to Pakistan, and the man believed to have sent the money, Ahmed Omar Said Sheikh, admitted to having been backed by the Pakistani intelligence services, the ISI. General Ahmed, who ordered the transfer of $100,000 to Mohammed Atta, was never investigated. The evidence directly connecting Osama bin Laden to the planning is questioned, mentioning that the Pentagon's translation of a video supposedly found in Afghanistan, where he admits responsibility, is highly problematic. Additionally, the connections between the Bush family and the bin Laden family are highlighted, including meetings in the presence of Osama's brother, Shafiq bin Laden, at a Carlyle Group meeting on the morning of September 11. The sources devote a considerable portion to questioning the collapse of the buildings, the Twin Towers, World Trade Center 1 and 2. It is described that they fell at a speed very close to free fall. This implies that the floors were destroyed at a rate of about 10 floors per second, which is equal to or 99% identical to what happens during a controlled demolition by explosion. The official theory of progressive collapse, the pancake effect, does not explain how the buildings could have reached free fall speed, since the law of conservation of momentum does not allow for progressive movement at that speed through resistance. The buildings were designed to withstand the impact of a Boeing 707 airplane. The way they collapsed suggests that the central steel columns, which should have remained standing, were cut. World Trade Center Building 7. This 47-story skyscraper was not hit by a plane. It only had fires on 2 or 3 floors. However, it completely collapsed within seconds, almost at free fall speed. Sources describe it as the result of a controlled demolition, using the way it caved in at the center as evidence. Evidence of demolition, the pulverization of concrete, the collapse pattern similar to controlled demolitions, and the sound of explosions reported by witnesses are cited as evidence of demolition. The discovery of melted steel in the rubble of all 3 buildings for weeks after the collapse is emphasized, at temperatures higher than what jet fuel can reach. Thermite is mentioned as a material that produces molten iron and can cut structural steel, and it is claimed that traces of thermitic material were found in the debris of the World Trade Center. The evidence of controlled demolition is described as overwhelming. The sources also question the events at the Pentagon and in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. It is argued that it's hard to believe a large airplane could fly through an obstacle course and make a 270-degree downward turn, especially given that the pilot, Hani Hanjour, was known for being very poor. The lack of significant debris, seats, luggage, or bodies is presented as evidence against the impact of a 757. It is mentioned that the airplane's engines, made of steel and titanium alloys, could not have been vaporized by jet fuel. It is claimed that government agents confiscated security camera videos that could show what really hit the Pentagon, and that the Department of Justice has refused to release them. Shanksville. At the crash site, only a smoking crater was reported, with no significant airplane debris. The existence of a second debris site miles away is presented as highly unlikely if it were just a simple crash. The 9/11 Commission is criticized for ignoring evidence. It is mentioned that their report makes no reference to the building's collapse, implicitly acknowledging that they couldn't explain it. Additionally, it is pointed out that the NIST report on Building 7 did not analyze any steel samples to verify the controlled demolition hypothesis, and that their computer model was biased toward a fire-induced collapse. It is mentioned that Vice President Cheney and President Bush insisted on appearing together before the commission, not under oath, with no press, no families of the victims, no recordings, and no transcripts. The executive director of the commission, Philip Zelikow, is criticized for his ties to the Bush administration and for having written drafts of the pre-attack strategy used for the Iraq War. It is stated that, literally, there is nothing in the 9/11 report that the Bush administration did not approve. That is, every document, every discussion was thoroughly reviewed by Bush. If he didn't like it, it didn't go through. It is alleged that September 11th, as a false flag operation, enabled the authorization of doctrines and funding necessary for a new level of imperial mobilization. It has been used to launch wars against Iraq and Afghanistan. It was also the pretext for the war against you, leading to the approval of laws like the Patriot Act and the National Security Act, designed to strip you of your civil liberties and limit your ability to fight back against anything they decide. This includes the possibility of searches without a warrant, arrests without specific charges, indefinite detention without a lawyer, and legal torture, all under the suspicion of being a terrorist. This situation is compared to the false flag attack that, according to sources, Hitler orchestrated in 1933, blaming the communists to justify repressive laws and preemptive wars. The sources suggest that the war on terror is an endless war that can never be won, thus allowing them to keep taking away people's freedoms. The idea of an external enemy, terrorism, is seen as a technique used by governments to manipulate public opinion and maintain social cohesion based on a monstrous myth. In summary, the sources present September 11th not as a surprise terrorist attack by Al-Qaeda, but as an orchestrated operation intended to justify wars, increase military spending, reduce civil liberties, and promote a global hegemonic agenda. A large amount of information is provided that challenges the official narrative, focusing on evidence of controlled demolition, the lack of evidence of planes at the Pentagon and Shanksville, and the alleged complicity or inaction of government agencies. Then, on February 27, 1933, the Reichstag building, home of the German parliament, was consumed by flames. The Nazi authorities quickly blamed the communists, using the event as a pretext to implement the Reichstag fire decree, which suspended civil rights and allowed arrests without trial. This act consolidated Hitler's power and eliminated political opposition. On the other hand, on September 11, 2001, the United States suffered one of the most devastating attacks in its history. The Twin Towers collapsed after being hit by hijacked planes. There are those who question the official version of events, suggesting that the U.S. government may have had prior knowledge or even facilitated the attacks to justify military interventions in the Middle East and the implementation of mass surveillance policies. Conclusion: the use of fear is a tool for control. Both events, separated by almost 7 decades, show a pattern: a devastating attack followed by a rapid consolidation of power and the implementation of controversial policies. It is suggested that these events may not have been mere coincidences, but rather deliberate tactics to manipulate public opinion and advance specific political agendas under a justifiable pretext. After the invasion of Iraq in 2003, American companies like ExxonMobil, Halliburton, and Chevron secured multi-million-dollar contracts to exploit Iraqi oil fields. ExxonMobil, for example, signed a $50 billion agreement to develop the West Kurna oil field. Additionally, in 2003, President George Bush issued Executive Order 13303, which protected the interests of American companies in Iraqi oil by granting them legal immunity from lawsuits related to their operations. Meanwhile, the Iraqi population faced poverty, corruption, and violence. The province of Basra, rich in oil, became a symbol of the deep inequalities that persisted after the U.S. invasion. Today, more than 2 decades later, the consequences of that war are still being felt. The presence of foreign companies in Iraq's oil sector continues, and the contracts signed back then are still generating profits. It all started with September 11, an attack that shocked the world and gave the United States the perfect excuse. They said they were seeking justice, that they were going to find weapons of mass destruction, but those weapons never appeared. What the American soldiers did find was oil. They invaded countries, overthrew governments, sowed chaos, and left with their pockets full. What began on September 11th with fire and ruins ended with overflowing barrels and contracts that are still being cashed in quietly today. And what do you really think 9/11 was? Was it a coincidence or was it strategy? Now I ask you, do you think these events were just accidents, or are they part of a dark formula that gets repeated whenever those in power need an excuse? Leave your opinion in the comments. What do you think about this possible conspiracy? Do you think Bush pulled the same move as Hitler? Or is all of this just an exaggerated reading of history? I'm reading your comments. And as always, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed our story, please give us a like. And if you want to stay tuned for new stories, we invite you to subscribe. It's free. We'll see you in the next chapter of the history they don't always want to tell us.